All right, guys, so we're going to talk about chapter 6, Beast from Air. And it's very important what happens in the first few pages of chapter 6. And I'm sorry, you hear my roosters. And it kind of doesn't say it as forwardly as it could, and therefore some of my students normally get confused at this point. But basically what we see at the beginning of chapter 6, it says that there's a sudden bright explosion, a corkscrew trail across the sky, then darkness again and stars. Basically we see some flashes, which we can assume are bombs. And we see this figure, and this figure comes down. It's attached to a parachute. And so basically this is a dead man attached to a parachute that falls on the island. The boys don't see it because they're sleeping. And then they wake up and the signal fires out. So Sam and Eric get up and they go to find wood. And basically they run into this dead parachutist with his parachute like stuck in some tree limbs at night. And the boys see it in the dark and they have no idea what it is. Obviously the parachute would be blowing in the wind. The figure would move back and forth because it's dangling from the parachute. And Sam and Eric think that it's the Beast, and they come back and they tell the boys that it's the Beast, and Ralph calls a meeting and they decide to go on a hunt for the Beast. And Ralph allows Jack to lead this hunt, and so the boys gear up and they are getting ready to go to the meeting. I am going to note this here. Basically they ask about the conch, and Jack says, conch, we don't need the conch anymore. We know who ought to say things. And that's just interesting to note that happens as they're getting ready to go on this hunt for the Beast. And so basically they go on this hunt. And they find this area that they think would be very nice. And a lot of the boys are talking about building a fort there. Some boys start rolling rocks. Basically, the same thing happens that happens in every sort of like activity they set out to do, is the boys lose track of why they're there and what they're doing. And Ralph becomes irritated with them. And says that the signal fires out, and they're like, well, we're tired, we want to go home. Let's have a fort, let's build a fort here. Ralph says there's no food here, there's no shelter, not fresh water. And the boys are like, well, we can roll rocks. And Ralph is like, well, we're going back to the shelter, you're going to go start the signal fire. And the boys are annoyed, but they follow what Ralph has to say. And that's chapter 6. It was pretty short. Next week, you guys are going to be reading chapters 7, 8, and 9. And I'll try to do the same thing with this. But just a side point that I wanted to make. Your discussion question for this week, it asked about what is ironic with the outside world and with the world that these boys are living in. And basically, we see the boys, especially in chapter 5, Piggy is like, oh my gosh, I just wish my auntie were here. Like, what would the adults say? How would they react in this situation? How can we like react like they would react? And so basically they're trying to like pull in the adults for like knowledge as to what to do in this situation. But when we look at what's actually going on in their outside world in this book, the outside world is at war. There's atom bombs going off. There's dead parachutists falling on their island. And The outside world is at war, just like these boys are starting. There's a lot of tension between Jack and Ralph, and these boys are starting to kind of see a little bit of war on their own island between themselves. And I found this quote on the SparkNotes analysis that I wanted to share that kind of speaks to that point. Just as the boys struggle with the conflict between civilization and savagery on the island, the outside world is gripped in a similar conflict. War represents the savage outburst of civilization when the desire for violence and power overwhelms the desire for order and peace. Even though the outside world has bestowed upon the boys a sense of mortality and order, the danger of savagery remains real, even within the context of that seemingly civilized society that has nurtured them. And just going back to what Piggy said in chapter 5. What if it's not the beastie that we have to be afraid of? What if it's people like us, the savagery within ourselves? And so that is chapter 6. And if you guys have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to let me know. And I will do my best to address those as well. Thank you guys. I hope you guys have a great day.